Hey guys! In this video we're going to talk about perspective. And perspective is a thing that sometimes trips people up in the beginning, but once you get it, you've totally got it. And questions like this, or questions where you can use this skill, will come up a lot. A lot of the Common App essay questions talk about, tell us a time when your viewpoint on something fundamentally changed. That's an obvious perspective question, right? A lot of other supplemental essay questions will literally just use the word perspective. Like, tell us about a perspective that you have or a perspective that changed. They really like the changing perspective things. So keeping all of that stuff in mind, what are we going to do with this? We start out with this just very, very simple concept. How can you look at a blank? How can you look at, in this case, a ball? Something very simple, a simple everyday object, okay? Something with not too much detail necessarily. And we just want to think about, what are some ways that we can look at it? So, a couple of things. First off, nothing is the wrong answer. Keep that in mind. But this one's usually a little less good. I can look at a ball when I am happy or sad. The reason why it's less good is that, yes, you can, but it ends up being less interesting usually, right? Because what we need to do, the second step here, is to say, okay, what would it be like to look at everything in the world when I am happy or sad? So if I look around at everything and I'm happy, then I'm like, oh, look, there's birds chirping and the sky is blue. And even when it rains, maybe I'm like, oh, yay, the trees are getting water. Oh, yay. But that is super, cliche and boring and, happy-go-lucky, and it's not interesting, right? So a lot of times, emotional perspectives actually don't work out as well as you might hope. If you still want to try it, totally try it. But if it's boring, I'm going to tell you it's boring. All right. Also slightly less good, I can look at a ball when it is sitting on the ground, or when it is just kind of not really doing much, or if something's happening to it, like when it is raining. It's not the rain has nothing to do with the ball. It doesn't necessarily interact with the ball, and there's not really an easy metaphorical way to take this. Oh, what would it be like to look at everything in the world when it's sitting on the ground? Well, it's sort of like the way that we do every day, where you look at a building and it's sitting on the ground, and it's just not that interesting, right? So you get to this point where you're kind of like, oh, I guess. So things like this, maybe try to avoid that sort of a thing. Often I encourage more the lens type of perspective, which we'll get into in a second. But something like this can still sort of work. I mean, there's totally ways that you can, turn metaphors around, make all kinds of crazy stuff happen. So again, if you want to try it, totally go ahead and talk to us about it. Okay, this is kind of a mid-range, right? I can look at a ball when it gets struck by lightning. So initially, the issue is this is still something that's just happening to the ball. And it's not like everything in the world always gets struck by lightning, so you can't be like, oh, what is it like to look at, the sky when it's being struck by light? Well, it doesn't get struck by light. That doesn't make any sense, because that's not how it works, right? What is it like to look at my bicycle when it gets struck by lightning? Well, you don't know. That's never happened to you in your whole life. I mean, if it has, then definitely write a story about that. But it hasn't really, right? Most likely. So it's a little bit difficult. If we get metaphorical, maybe you want to start talking about sparks or energy or scraggly lines across the sky or something else. That's cool. If you want to talk about lightning, totally cool. We'll get to some other, the same different exercises and things like that later, where you could totally use lightning. But maybe in the perspective thing, lightning doesn't give you a unique perspective necessarily, right? So that's a possibly kind of a one. Also possibly, I can look at a ball when it's in a seal's mouth, right? Again, it's not necessarily anything inherent to the ball, but is there some sort of a metaphor for in the seal's mouth? Who knows, right? Maybe it's in some kind of a danger or whatever. Be wary though, when you create these perspectives, you don't want to go with something where it is, terribly negative. So if you write an entire essay about how you look at everything in the world as if it's on the verge of being destroyed and crushed by a seal's jaws, it might be interesting, but it's not exactly going to get you into college, right? So just keep things like that in mind. We do want to keep it a little more on the up and up, not super depressing, not super graphic, most likely. So there's that. Some better things. So giving you an idea, not of the correct answer, but a path that usually works pretty well for most kids. Okay. I can look at a ball through a window. this seems super simple, right? It seems like not as interesting maybe as some of the other ones. But what we're doing is creating a perspective that we will then apply to everything. So most of what I do is I think about it in terms of like, what is something you could put in front of your eyes? Okay, so you could like wave your fingers in front of your eyes and you can look at the whole world through your fingers. You can look at the whole world through a window, right? So we've got that. You can look at the whole world through water or through a telescope. And then what do these things mean? If you're looking at the whole world through a window, there's sort of a barrier between you and the world. So what you're thinking about metaphorically is even when you're walking along the street and you see a car, there's no window necessarily between you and that car. Maybe there's the windows of the car. But you could also see a tree and there's no window between you and that tree. But still you're looking at it as if through a window. And what does that mean? This is where you get creative, right? And you just sort of have to make up what it means because it doesn't inherently mean anything at all. What does it mean to look at everything in the world through water or as if it's underwater? It doesn't mean that you go scuba diving all the time. That's not what that means. That's a literal interpretation. What we're looking for is much more the figurative, much more the metaphorical, right? So what does it mean to look at things through water? Water has a tendency to sort of distort things, but in a very soft way, right? So maybe we want to talk about distortions. Who knows? Okay, so just giving you kind of ideas. If you're looking at things through a telescope, maybe that means that you're really interested in the tiny details. Maybe it means that you're really interested in looking at things that are far away from you. Again, far away can be physically far away, like the stars, or it can be metaphorically far away, like something that you don't understand yet. So maybe this is your approach to education. Who knows? Okay. You can look at a ball through a camera, through a veil, things like that. All these different things that you can put in front of your eyes, right? That's kind of the idea. These ones usually work pretty well because it's a little bit easier to take them metaphorically, all right? Also cool, you can look at a reflection of the ball. Oop, I had a typo in there. At a reflection or the reflection of a ball. So why is that cool? Because you can look at reflections of anything, right? Technically. You can look at a picture of something. That's not the actual thing. It's a representation of it. So maybe now we're talking about representations, and that's a theme inside the essay. For reflections are pretty cool. We did a couple of years back an entire essay seminar on how the sun creates its own light, but the moon is only a reflector of light, and the difference between creating and reflecting and energies and some stuff like that. And it was pretty nice, right? It was really nifty. We wrote that essay in like 20 minutes too. So remember, the skill that you're developing is the skill of just kind of splashing stuff onto a page, right? And just having that inspirational moment. Not trying to get too nitty gritty. You're at the very beginning of this process. We'll get nitty gritty like way, way later on. Okay. And then I can look at the outline of a ball. Okay. So this is just sort of like, maybe instead of paying attention to the middle details, you're really only looking at the bare fundamental aspects of what the ball is or what the whole world is. What does it mean to look at everything in the world as only an outline? I don't know, right? I mean, I would have to make something up. It doesn't mean anything necessarily, remember. You have to make it up. So, when you're going through this, you can use some of these and totally, steal from me. That's totally fine. These honestly are things that students come up with all of the time. The, camera, telescope, all that stuff. They're pretty common answers. So it's not about like the answer itself, right? Remember, it's about your interpretation of it, your metaphorical direction that you go in. So what does it mean to look at the outline of a ball? It's just whatever outline means to you, whatever you end up deciding that it means. And that part will be fundamentally different from the last guy, right? It's going to be different from the last student. So you don't have to worry about, any of that stuff. However, we are going to do this exercise a lot. So you will have to come up with a lot of different things, much more than I have shown you in this video. So you will need a bunch more. Okay, let's practice.